I had just returned from a 3-day charity trip, only to find my luggage dumped on the lawn next to a cold little note. "We need space. Please understand." It was written by my own son. But you have no idea what I discovered next. An old wooden box and letters that turned my entire life upside down. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you won't miss our next story packed with jaw-dropping twists. Evelyn Snow had always loved the quiet. It was a stillness she had learned to cultivate not just in her garden, where the lavender bloomed in straight lines, and the climbing roses tangled with discipline, but in her way of living, of breathing, of stepping softly through a house she had spent 40 years filling with warmth. So when she pulled up to the familiar white gate of 428 Willow Lane, after 3 days away, it took a moment for the silence to register as wrong, not serene, not peaceful, hollow. The birds weren't singing. The wind didn't rustle the oak tree in its usual rhythm. Something was missing. She stepped out of the taxi, tugging her small suitcase behind her, still wearing the denim jacket she had packed for the weekend charity retreat at Lake Wyndham. There was still a whiff of pine and wood smoke on her sleeves. Then she saw it. Her rose trellis snapped at the base, petals strewn like torn paper. The flower pots she had arranged under the front window shattered. Soil spilled across the concrete like spilled blood. Her favorite ceramic pot with the hummingbird design lay in 3 clean pieces near the porch. Her eyes drifted upward. A note, taped to the front door. No keys under the mat. No welcome home text. Just a white sheet of printer paper curling at the edges in the breeze, held in place with clear tape like some cold official notice. She felt her chest tighten as she climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wooden boards didn't creak beneath her feet like they used to. Or maybe they did. Maybe she just couldn't hear them over the pounding in her ears. She reached for the note, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to read it. Some part of her already knew what it said, but her hand moved anyway, slow and deliberate. The words were printed neatly. "Mom, we've decided it's time for a change. Clarissa's parents are moving in. We need the space. Hope you understand. Nathan." Evelyn stared at the paper. The words blurred. Not from tears. Not yet. Nathan, her son, her boy. She used to read his school essays late at night, correcting grammar with a red pen, but secretly marveling at how clever he was. She had those essays in a file box somewhere upstairs. No, not anymore. Not if he'd already gone this far. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the yard. That's when she saw the rest of it. Her suitcases, all 3. Stacked near the driveway like unwanted packages. Next to them was a cardboard box with her name scribbled in Sharpie Evelyn. One of the flaps had come loose, and a photo album poked out. Pages bent. The image on top was of her and her husband Arthur, the day they moved in, him lifting her off the porch laughing. She could still hear the joy in his voice. The image fluttered in the wind and fell into the dirt. Evelyn knelt down slowly. She picked up the album and held it to her chest. She didn't cry. She stood. Across the street, Mrs. Halbrook was frozen in her yard gardening gloves, clutched to her chest. 2 kids, probably from the Johnson house, were watching from their porch, eyes wide and mouths half open like they were waiting for a punchline. She felt their pity as if it had weight pressing down on her shoulders. Evelyn walked back to the front door. She raised her hand and knocked once. Softly. No answer. She knocked again, this time harder. The sound echoed through the frame of the door, bounced through the silence of the house she had cleaned and decorated and prayed in for 4 decades. Still nothing. She pounded her fist once, twice. The door opened a sliver. Nathan peeked out. His face was blank pale, his eyes avoiding hers. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "Mom," he said, his voice clipped. "It's better this way." From behind him, Clarissa appeared. Her arms were crossed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her elbows. She looked at Evelyn like one might regard a water stain on a nice white carpet, regretful, but ultimately inconvenienced. "You've had your time here," she said. "We need the space. My parents deserve comfort in their old age." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond. Nothing came out. When had she ever asked for comfort? She thought of the thousands of dinners she had cooked, the nights she sat by Nathan's bed with a cold cloth on his forehead. The birthdays she organized for Clarissa. The year she skipped her retirement cruise because Nathan's startup was tanking and he needed a loan. The loan she never asked to be repaid. She remembered the nights she'd rocked their son Elijah to sleep because Clarissa said she needed rest, even though Evelyn's arthritis was so bad she couldn't feel her fingers by morning. She thought of the roses, the bread she baked every Sunday, the whispers of her husband's voice still trapped in the hallways. She tried again, but Nathan had already started to close the door. No goodbye, no guilt, just the soft finality of a lock sliding into place. She heard the click like a gunshot. Evelyn stood on the porch, the note still in her hand. The sun pressed down on her scalp. A bead of sweat rolled down her neck. The breeze didn't feel soft anymore. It stung. She looked down at her suitcase. One small bag. That's all they'd left her. She walked back down the steps slowly, her eyes on the gravel. Each stone looked sharp. Each one seemed to say, "You were never meant to stay." Evelyn picked up her suitcase and wheeled it toward the street. The neighbors were still watching. She didn't look up. She didn't cry. Not yet. But inside something was breaking. Not her heart. That had been fraying for years. Not her hope. That had died the day Clarissa moved in and started rearranging furniture without asking. No, what broke was her belief that love was enough. That loyalty was protection. That sacrifice guaranteed safety. She paused at the corner of Willow Lane, her old street name etched in the green metal sign above her. She turned back once. Just once. She saw the house white siding, gray shutters, pink flowers drooping in the sun. Her garden looked like it had been weeping. She whispered something so quietly no one could hear it. "Goodbye, Arthur." Then she turned the corner and never looked back. The room smelled like damp plaster and faded desperation. Evelyn Snow stood in the middle of it, her suitcase leaning against the cracked wall, a coil of fatigue settling into her spine like a second skin. The place had once been a storage room, or maybe a guest loft that no one ever used. Now it was her refuge, her exile. A single window looked out over the alley, barred and smudged, barely letting in the late afternoon light. The landlady had handed her the key with a disinterested shrug, no questions asked. Cash up front, no lease, no paperwork. Just one question, you alone? Evelyn had nodded. She supposed that was the answer now. Alone. She lowered herself onto the stiff mattress which groaned beneath her. Her knees ached from climbing the 2 flights of stairs. Her hands trembled as she removed her shoes carefully, mechanically, like a woman trying to remember how to exist. She hadn't eaten since the morning. Her stomach felt like paper crumpled into a ball. Every time she tried to swallow, her throat clenched shut. It wasn't hunger, it was grief, or something uglier. She couldn't name it. The room had no sound, no ticking clock, no refrigerator hum, just silence and Evelyn's thoughts scraping against her skull like sandpaper. She looked down at her hands, spotted, veined, wrinkled. These were hands that had cooked thousands of meals, wrapped countless gifts, tended dozens of wounds and roses. These hands had held Nathan as a baby, had tucked him in, had held his father's hand as he took his last breath in the hospital bed near the garden window. And now they had held a note taped to a door that ended everything. Evelyn rose slowly, crossing to the small counter in the corner. There was a single cup on the shelf. She filled it with tap water that ran rusty at first, then cleared. She took a sip. It tasted like old pennies. She sat again, the cup trembling in her grip. The weight of it all pressed down. The loss, the betrayal, the shame. She hadn't told anyone. Not her friends from the charity circle, not Mrs. Halbrook, not even Janet from the neighborhood committee who used to bring her cinnamon buns after board meetings. No one knew where she was now. That suited her just fine. The thought came softly, like a whisper she didn't want to hear but couldn't ignore. Would anyone notice if I disappeared? The idea didn't come fully formed. Not at first. It came in glances, in the way the wind scraped against the window pane, in the reflection of her gaunt face in the dirty mirror, in the tired ache that curled around her shoulders like a cold scarf. She rose, walked to the window. 3 stories below the alley was empty. One flickering light buzzed above the dumpster. She could hear faint music, muffled bass from an apartment across the way. Laughter, too. Someone living. Someone still being chosen. Her hand pressed against the glass. She hadn't cried yet, not since the porch. But now the tears came, not all at once, not dramatic, just a single one sliding down her cheek, tracing a line like a memory down to her jaw. She backed away from the window. Something inside her screamed, "Don't be pathetic. Don't be weak." But the scream was tiny and tired. She sat down on the bed and opened her suitcase. Maybe she was looking for a distraction, a toothbrush, a pair of socks, something mundane, something to anchor her back to the earth. Instead, she found the wooden box, tucked under a sweater she hadn't worn in years. Cedarwood aged and scarred with a brass latch and initials carved on the side, A.S. Arthur Snow, her husband, gone 10 years now, heart failure, quick, brutal, quiet. Evelyn hadn't opened the box since the year after his death. She couldn't even remember packing it. She sat cross-legged on the bed, the box between her knees, her breath shallow. Her fingers hesitated over the latch. She opened it. Inside paper, bundles of it, tied with faded ribbons, some yellowing at the edges, others crisp and untouched. A stack of envelopes, each one with her name in Arthur's distinct handwriting, elegant, slanted, unmistakable. Evelyn. She reached for the top letter. The paper felt soft, worn from time. It smelled faintly of old books and lavender oil, her scent once upon a time. She unfolded it. My dearest Eve, if you're reading this, it means time has done what time always does. But I need you to know something. Your strength is the foundation of everything we built. This house, our son, our life. You carried it all, and I know you'll carry more even when it's unfair. That's who you are. She stopped. A sob escaped her lips, raw and sudden. She pressed the letter to her chest. It felt like he was there, speaking through the paper, reaching across time. She read on. I never said it enough, but you were the soul of our home. I saw how you sacrificed. I saw how tired you were. And I also saw how alone you felt even when surrounded by people. That's why I left something for you. Evelyn's brow furrowed. She rifled through the box. More letters, some dated years apart. Others labeled read on your 65th birthday, open after Elijah's birth. She hadn't even known these existed. He must have hidden them over time, slipping them into the attic or under drawers or maybe behind the pantry like his old journals. One bundle was marked in red ink, property documents, for Evelyn's eyes only. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. Inside were notarized copies of deeds, legal transfers, bank account summaries, and one crisp certificate. Title of ownership, Seabrook Bluff. Lot 17, Evelyn Snow, sole title holder. She stared. Seabrook Bluff. They had vacationed there once years ago. Small coastal town, foggy mornings and gull calls. Arthur loved the cliffs, said he wanted to die with that view in his mind. She remembered thinking it was just sentiment. But he'd bought land there, for her, in her name. She flipped through more documents. The property had been bought under a trust. Quietly, legally. He had paid the taxes every year. There were copies of receipts, maintenance notes, even photographs of the plot, wild grass, a wooden bench, a small mailbox labeled E. Snow in his handwriting. He never told her. But he planned it all, her escape, her shelter, her sanctuary. And now, years later, it was waiting. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face, hot and thick. She hadn't just been discarded. She hadn't just been erased. She had been seen, prepared for, protected even in absence. She reached for another letter. This one had no date, just a single word on the front. When you're ready. She opened it. You may feel lost now. You may feel broken. But you are not done. You are not disposable. You are still Evelyn. The world may try to silence you, Eve, but you've always had your own voice. Use it. Use it now. She folded the letter with shaking hands. She looked around the dingy little room, the cracked ceiling, the mold in the corner, the peeling wallpaper. She saw it all clearly now. This wasn't the end. This was the in-between. The beginning was still ahead. And somewhere waiting by the sea was the space her husband built for her with his silence and his foresight. Evelyn leaned back against the wall, the box in her lap, her heart still fractured, but for the first time in days, she could feel something pushing through the cracks. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But purpose. Purpose and the first flicker of a plan. The morning light filtered in soft and golden through the dusty window, casting delicate bars of warmth onto the quilted edge of the mattress, where Evelyn Snow sat, the wooden box still cradled in her lap. The letter marked, "When you're ready," lay open beside her, and her eyes, though red-rimmed and heavy from the weight of the night before, had a sharpness to them now. Something had stirred. She reached back into the box, her fingers moving past folded envelopes and aged ribbon, until they brushed a parchment that felt smoother than the rest, thicker, newer. It wasn't a letter. It was an envelope sealed with a wax stamp, the faded AS pressed into its face like a whisper through time. Evelyn cracked the seal. Inside was a single page folded in two. Eve. If the world has taken too much from you, if you're reading this because they forgot who you are, then I want you to find your way back to something that is only yours. You'll find it where the ocean breathes and the gulls still cry in the fog at 17. Seabrook Bluff. The deed is in your name. The bench is still there facing the tide. Take it. Reclaim it. Love, Arthur. Her breath caught. She pulled out the thick bundle from the bottom of the box, a set of official papers carefully arranged in a clear protective sleeve, each one immaculately preserved. The deed indeed was there. Seabrook Bluff Lot 17, sole owner Evelyn Snow. Along with it, the purchase contract tax receipts spanning nearly a decade, property survey maps with Arthur's annotations in the margins. Great sun exposure here for daisies. View clears best at dawn. He'd bought it years ago, quietly, privately, and somehow miraculously kept it hidden. The documents bore the signature of a local attorney in Seabrook. The purchase had been made under a trust that listed Evelyn as the sole beneficiary, with Arthur managing payments discreetly until his death. She couldn't breathe, not out of panic, but from something deeper, something like awe. She clutched the papers to her chest as if afraid they might vanish if she blinked. Then she set them gently beside her and leaned back against the cold wall. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling, but she wasn't looking at the plaster. She was seeing through it, seeing years, decades. The first time she and Arthur visited Seabrook, they had been newlyweds. He had driven 5 hours just to show her the sea cliffs he'd read about in some forgotten magazine. They ate sandwiches in the car and watched the tide drag pebbles in and out like a lullaby. "You ever wonder what peace smells like?" he'd asked her then, the sea breeze tousling his hair. "I think it's salt and rosemary." She had laughed, nestled into his shoulder. Later, when Nathan was born, there had been no more spontaneous trips. Evelyn gave up teaching for a while. Arthur worked double shifts at the post office then as a clerk at the harbor registry. Everything became about survival, keeping the house, keeping Nathan fed, keeping hope alive. Then came the promotions, the raise. Evelyn returned to teaching part-time at first. She always said she'd go back full-time, maybe write that novel she had buried in her dresser drawer. But then came Clarissa. Then came Elijah. Then came the years. She remembered holding Elijah for the first time, his tiny hand curling instinctively around her thumb. She thought, this is it. This is what it was all for. But that joy had faded too, replaced by endless babysitting duties while Clarissa went to spas or book clubs that never discussed books. Evelyn never said no, not once, not even when her back screamed and her knees ached. She thought love meant saying yes. Now here she sat, the daughter-in-law who had stolen her place, the son who had pushed her out, and the child she rocked to sleep. None of them had imagined this. That Arthur, her quiet, unassuming husband, had been building a secret sanctuary for her all along. She pressed a palm to her chest. The tears came sudden and loud, ugly sobs that wrenched from her like a dam bursting. She doubled over her shoulders, shaking her breath, hitching with the rawness of it all. He had seen her. Arthur had seen her. Through the chaos, through the neglect, through the years of fading into the wallpaper of her own home, he had never stopped seeing her. He had known long before she did that there might come a day when love would not be enough, that she might need somewhere to go. He had prepared for it. That knowledge shattered her, and then it steadied her. It was like having someone hold your hand across death. like being told you were never invisible. Not to me. She picked up one of the maps from the folder. His notes danced in blue ink along the coastline. Wind strongest in this corner. Good spot for a wind chime. Maybe someday we build a porch swing here. Eve's view sunrise side. She let her fingers drift across the words. Her name in his hand. The man who never bought her flowers spontaneously, who forgot their anniversary twice, who always burnt the toast he had done this. Not for show, not for praise, but in the quiet, enduring way he had always loved her. A knock on the wall jolted her. Thin drywall. Someone in the unit next door. Arguing. A woman's voice sharp, a man's louder. The sound rose, then fell, then slammed into silence. Evelyn closed the folder. She looked around the room. Peeling linoleum. Stained ceiling tiles. No closet, no stove. No pictures on the wall. Just this bed, this box, and her memories. This wasn't where she was meant to stay. This wasn't where Arthur meant for her to wither. She reached for the letter again, the one with the directions to Seabrook. She hadn't driven in years. The thought of packing, navigating highways, talking to attorneys, it all felt monumental. But as she stared at the folder, the letter, the deed, a different voice rose within her. It wasn't his. It was hers. And it was waking up. You still exist, Evelyn. You are not just what they left behind. You are what comes next. She stood slowly. Her legs trembled, but she didn't sit back down. She moved toward her suitcase and pulled out her oldest scarf, blue wool, a gift from Arthur in their first winter. She wrapped it around her shoulders and moved to the mirror. The reflection was brutal, hair unbrushed, eyes red, cheeks hollow. But there was steel behind her eyes now. Not anger, not yet, but certainty. She reached for the envelope again, tucking it into her purse with the deed and the maps. She didn't know what she'd find when she got to Seabrook. She didn't know what she'd do. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, maybe years, she felt her spine straighten. She wasn't running away. She was stepping into something hers. Evelyn Snow didn't rush. There was something sacred in her slowness now. Every movement deliberate, every breath a quiet reclaiming of space that had been stolen from her for far too long. She stepped off the city bus and stood in front of the gray stone building that bore the brass plaque, Martin and Finch Law and Title, established 1963. It was tucked between a shuttered bakery and an old pharmacy that still had a faded film developed here sign in the window. The law office looked untouched by time dust on the window's ivy, curling up one side, like the arms of memory itself. Evelyn adjusted her coat, then pushed the heavy glass door open. A soft chime rang out. The air inside smelled like old paper and stronger coffee. The wood-paneled walls and green leather chairs in the waiting area gave the room the feel of an era when people still sent handwritten letters and held grudges with dignity. Behind the counter, a young receptionist with bright red glasses looked up from her computer. "Good morning," she chirped. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "But if Richard Martin still works here, please tell him Evelyn Snow is asking." The receptionist's smile faded slightly, replaced by curiosity. Just a moment. She disappeared behind a sliding glass door. Evelyn waited. Her eyes wandered to the certificates on the wall, the faded family photo on the side table. The ticking of a nearby wall clock felt impossibly loud. Then the door opened again. A voice followed, warm, graveled, familiar. "Evelyn." She turned. There he was, Richard Martin. Thinner than she remembered, but not frail. His full head of silver hair was neatly combed back. His tie slightly loosened at the collar. His blazer looked like it had seen every courtroom in the state. But his eyes, sharp, steady, curious, those hadn't aged a day. "Arthur's Evelyn?" he asked, though his smile already said he knew. "Yes," she replied. He stepped forward, grasping both of her hands. "My God, it's been, 12 years? 14, she whispered. He guided her into his office without another word. Inside, time folded neatly. There were books upon books, case files stacked with surgical precision, a dusty model sailboat perched on the window. It smelled of cedar ink and old trust. He gestured to a chair and she lowered herself into it. The worn leather groaned like it was welcoming her back. So Richard said, sitting behind the desk folding his hands, "Tell me everything." And she did. Not all the heartbreak, not yet, but enough. She placed the folder of documents on the desk, slid them toward him. The deed, the trust certificates, Arthur's handwritten notes. Richard removed his glasses, replaced them with a sturdier pair, and began reading. He didn't speak for a long time, only nodded, flipped pages, jotted brief notes on a yellow legal pad. Arthur was always quiet, he murmured, but he was never careless. No, Evelyn agreed. He wasn't. When Richard finally looked up, his eyes held something close to wonder. This trust is clean, fully funded. The property's yours. No disputes, no liens. No one can touch it without your consent. She exhaled. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of it. He tapped his pen against the desk. Why now? I need to sell it, she said. He blinked. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Her voice was calm, composed, but her hands were fists in her lap. I want to liquidate the asset. Quietly, anonymously. Use the funds to start something of my own. No attention. No trail leading back to me, at least not until I'm ready. Richard studied her face for a moment. You're not running away. No, she said, I'm taking control. That made him smile. He opened a drawer, pulled out a sleek black file folder. If you trust me, I can make that happen. I have a contact in Seabrook, a real estate agent named Teresa Lowell. Discreet, efficient. A vault when it comes to privacy. We can list under the trust's holding name, no personal identifiers, no media, no neighbors whispering. I trust you, she said. He picked up the phone, pressed a single button. Get Teresa on the line. It's time. While they waited, Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window. She could see a slice of sky between the buildings, gray clouds heavy and low. It was going to rain. She thought of the bench on Lot 17, the way Arthur described the morning mist clinging to the bluff like a shy child, the way the wind carried salt instead of sorrow. She wouldn't see it again, and that was okay. This was about more than memory. It was about meaning. Richard hung up the phone. She's ready. I'll coordinate the paperwork. You'll need to sign a few things, but we'll handle the details. Give it a few days and it'll be live. Evelyn nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard leaned back in his chair. You know, he said Arthur came to me when he was setting this up. Never told you, I know. But he said something I never forgot. What was it? Richard smiled. He said, Evelyn's carried everyone for decades. If the world ever drops her, I want her to have somewhere soft to land. Evelyn looked down at her lap. Her eyes stung. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Richard said, reaching for a new stack of forms. We're just getting started. For the next hour, they worked in tandem. She signed here, initialed there. He explained every clause, every contingency, every tax implication. They set up a routing account under the trust's original bank to receive proceeds, established protections, ghosted identifiers. When it was done, he placed the final form into a manila folder and pressed his hand on top of it. You're protected. No one can trace this unless you want them to. Evelyn stood. Her legs didn't tremble this time. At the door, she paused. Can I ask you for one more thing? Anything. If they... She stopped, corrected herself. If someone comes looking for me, asks about this, you never saw me. His expression hardened, but he nodded. They'll get nothing from me but a locked door and a shut mouth. She managed a smile. As she stepped into the hallway, he called after her, Evelyn. She turned. They don't know what they've unleashed. No, she said, but they're going to learn. Outside, the rain had started. She didn't run from it. She walked slowly, letting it fall, letting it soak her through her coat and sweater and skin. It felt like baptism, like the city was washing her clean of the life she'd once begged to stay in. At the corner, she paused at a flower stall. The vendor, a young woman with a nose ring and chipped purple nails, was arranging daisies into plastic cones. Evelyn reached for a single stem. How much? On the house, the girl said with a wink. Evelyn took it. She didn't know why. Maybe because Arthur once said daisies were stubborn little things ugly in the cold, but always coming back. She tucked it into her coat pocket and kept walking, the petals peeking out over her lapel like a secret only she and the rain understood. By the time she reached her apartment again, the wind had picked up. Her fingers ached. Her coat stuck to her back. But she didn't care. She had moved a piece across the board. She had begun. And from here there was no going back. The call came on a Monday morning, quiet and unassuming. Evelyn Snow was seated by the window of her studio apartment, cradling a lukewarm mug of black tea in both hands, when her phone buzzed once and stopped. She recognized the number. "Richard." She pressed answer. "It's done," he said, no preamble. "Seabrook Bluff Lot 17 sold this morning, full cash offer above asking." Buyer didn't blink. Evelyn closed her eyes. She felt the shift, subtle as a tide, turning beneath her ribs. "How much?" Richard gave the figure. It was more than she'd imagined. Enough to breathe, enough to build, enough to never look over her shoulder again. "I wired the funds to the trust account. It's yours," he added. Evelyn didn't reply at first. She stood walking toward the window, watching the way the sunlight caught on the rooftops. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't counting the cracks in her ceiling or the coins in her purse. Her future had changed quietly but irreversibly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You earned every penny," Richard said. Then more softly, "So what are you going to do, Eve?" She didn't answer. Not yet. That night she laid the deed, the check confirmation, and Arthur's final letter out across her little kitchen table. The studio's single bulb flickered above, casting their shadows long and fragile. She thought about what she could buy. A small house near the coast, a second-hand car, a trip. God, when was the last time she traveled for herself? But none of it felt right. None of it matched what was burning in her chest. Because somewhere between that porch and this apartment, Evelyn had stopped wanting comfort. She wanted to matter. She wanted to take what they thought would break her and build something untouchable. She opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the page, she wrote 3 words, "The Thera Library." But then she crossed it out. She stared at the page. Minutes passed. Then she picked up her pen again and wrote slowly, carefully, as if naming a child. Minh Thu Center. Minh Thu, her Vietnamese name, the one her parents whispered into her cradle before they ever called her Evelyn. The name she hadn't used in decades, lost under layers of assimilation and motherhood and quiet sacrifice. She would reclaim that too. The Minh Thu Center would be a public reading space, yes, but it would also be something more. A place for women to sit without flinching. A sanctuary for women whose voices had been silenced, whose stories were erased, whose hands were used and never held. Evelyn spent the next week researching. She called local nonprofits, asked about shelter permits, zoning laws, grants. She met with social workers, sat through bureaucratic meetings where men in suits barely concealed their doubt. They saw her gray hair, her thrift store coat, and thought old woman chasing a dream she can't afford. Until they saw the trust fund. Until she presented the property, listing the bank statements, the legal documentation. Until she said without blinking, "This isn't charity, this is legacy." The building she chose had once been a small church, abandoned for years, hidden beneath vines and dust at the edge of the historic district. It had a bell tower that hadn't rung in decades, and stained glass windows cracked from weather but still beautiful. She bought it outright. No mortgage, no conditions. She stood in the sanctuary one rainy afternoon, the floorboards moaning beneath her feet, and whispered to herself, "This is where it begins." She hired a construction crew, young, local, kind-hearted folks who didn't flinch when she insisted on salvaging every pew, every old bookshelf, every piece of worn wood that could be made whole again. She painted the walls with her own hands. She chose the wallpaper for the reading room's soft blues and greens. She installed locks on every bedroom door and the shelter wing locks only the women inside could control. She built a kitchen with long tables and open windows. When the first shipment of books arrived, she cried, not out of nostalgia but power. She stocked the shelves with poetry memoirs, survival stories, cookbooks, self-defense manuals, children's tales written by women of color, queer authors, immigrants, survivors. She placed Arthur's letters in a shadow box in the entryway. No one would know the story behind them. But she would. They were her roots, and this was her bloom. On opening day, Evelyn stood in front of the building in a navy blue coat and a silver brooch that had once belonged to her mother. She watched the ribbon ripple in the wind. The sign above the entrance read, "Minh Thu Community Library and Shelter." Underneath it, in small cursive letters, "Where stories begin again." The mayor came, so did the local press. A reporter asked why Minh Thu. Evelyn looked into the camera and replied, "Because she's who I was before the world told me to be quiet." The photo ran in the Sunday paper. An older woman in a blue coat standing in front of a sanctuary of her own design hands, clasped eyes unflinching. The headline read, "Widow Turns Inheritance into Lifeline for Women in Need." The subheading, Min Thu, becomes a symbol of strength and shelter in downtown Havenbrook. But it was the op-ed that followed 3 days later that made the phones ring. A columnist, female 32 survivor of domestic violence, wrote, "The Min Thu Center isn't just a building, it's a message. It says, we see you, we believe you, you are not alone." Calls poured in. Books were donated. Volunteers arrived. Survivors brought casseroles and stories. A group of retired teachers offered to hold literacy classes. A florist down the street brought fresh bouquets for the front desk every Friday. A former client sent a letter. "Your center saved my life. I walked in with a broken tooth and a baby on my hip. You gave me both dignity and diapers." Evelyn moved into the small apartment upstairs converted from the old church office. She kept her wooden box on the shelf by the bed. She lit a candle every Sunday and read one of Arthur's letters aloud quietly into the space. The bell tower was restored, and every evening at 6 p.m. it rang, soft, clear, defiant. The women downstairs would pause, breathe, and know the hour marked more than time, it marked survival. Soon Evelyn couldn't walk through Havenbrook's market district without someone stopping her. A grocer offered her apples. A barista slipped her free tea. A young girl pressed a flower into her palm and said, "My mom said you're like a warrior angel." But it was the name they gave her online that made her pause. The Reborn Mother. Evelyn didn't know how to feel about it at first. She didn't feel reborn. She felt raw. But as she stood one night in the quiet of the library, watching a young woman tuck a child into one of the reading room couches, she understood. They didn't call her reborn because she had changed. They called her that because she had refused to disappear, because in a world that tried to erase women like her old, discarded, underestimated, she had written herself back in ink, in brick, in borrowed books and battered furniture, in locks that opened from the inside. The fall came fast. It started with a missed payment on Clarissa's boutique skincare line, a brand she had launched with borrowed money and curated arrogance, banking on Instagram influencers and her parents' credit cards. Then came a shipment delay, a customer dispute, a bad review from a micro-celebrity with too much time and a ring light. Investors pulled out. A silent panic set in. Nathan, once the rising star at his tech firm, had been let go in a quiet downsizing 2 weeks after Evelyn walked off that porch. He told no one, not Clarissa, not Elijah. He simply wore his button-down shirts each morning, left the apartment like he was going to work, and sat in the same park bench for hours watching joggers go by. Clarissa's parents, who had moved in expecting comfort and early retirement, were suddenly being sued for defaulting on 2 private loans. The house of cards collapsed in a single gust. Creditors called non-stop. Their high-rise condo went under foreclosure. Friends stopped answering messages. Even Clarissa's yoga instructor ghosted her. They ended up in a 2-room rental on the south edge of Havenbrook, above a shuttered laundromat that reeked of bleach and regret. The plumbing wheezed, the walls were yellowed, the neighbors screamed through the drywall. And in that fragile quiet after midnight, with the city pressing in, Nathan finally Googled his mother's name. He found her, not in an obituary, not on some quiet retirement list, but in headlines: "Widow Builds Sanctuary for Women in Need. Min Thu Center opens its doors with message of dignity and healing. The Reborn Mother of Havenbrook." There was a photo. His mother standing in front of a restored brick building. Her chin lifted, her eyes alive in a way he hadn't seen in years. Clarissa saw it too, her mouth tightened, lips white. "I thought she'd disappear," she whispered, but she hadn't. She'd become something else, and something in Nathan. Something brittle, buried beneath pride, cracked. 2 days later, he stood in front of the Min Thu Center, collar, wrinkled hair unwashed, gripping a folder with trembling fingers. The building loomed before him, elegant and quiet. Ivy curled around its corners. The stained glass windows flickered with afternoon light. Inside, the bell chimed softly 6 p.m. He didn't move. He couldn't. Not until a group of women exited the front doors laughing, clutching donated books. One of them nodded politely at him. Another paused. "You need something?" she asked. Nathan cleared his throat. "I'm looking for the director, Evelyn Snow." The woman's eyebrows lifted just slightly. She nodded toward the side entrance. "Back office. Try there." Nathan walked slowly each step like crossing a minefield. He passed shelves of donated goods, a mural painted by survivors, a reading nook, where 2 children played with building blocks beneath a plaque that read, "You are safe here." He reached the office. The door was open. His mother sat behind a wide desk, her glasses low on her nose, reading a letter. A vase of fresh daisies sat beside her elbow. Her hair was pinned neatly. She looked strong. She didn't see him right away. He knocked gently. She glanced up. For a moment time stopped. Evelyn froze pen hovering over paper. Their eyes met hers, cool, unreadable. His full of something raw and tangled. Neither spoke. Then Nathan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I read about the center," he said softly. "It's impressive." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Thank you." Silence. He shifted awkwardly, cleared his throat. I've been out of work. Clarissa and I, things are difficult." Still Evelyn said nothing. "I was wondering," he said, holding up the folder like a peace offering, "if there were any positions open. I'm not picky. Anything, really. I could do janitorial work, maintenance, deliveries, whatever's needed." Evelyn folded her hands. A long pause followed. "Then why here?" Nathan blinked. I want to help." She tilted her head slightly. "Because you believe in the mission, or because your life fell apart?" He didn't answer. Evelyn stood, walked to the window. Outside, women were planting herbs in the garden bed. A girl no older than 10 chased a butterfly along the sidewalk. The bell tower glinted gold in the sun. She turned back to him. "This place is sacred," she said quietly. "Every woman who walks through that door carries something shattered, and every person who works here must be whole enough to carry it with them at least for a while." Nathan's shoulders sagged. "I'm not asking to be forgiven," he said. I didn't know how far I'd fallen until I saw what you built." Her eyes softened just slightly. "There's an opening," she said. "Janitorial. Evening shift. It's quiet. No glory. Just sweat and silence. I'll take it. You'll need to fill out a background check, take a trauma-informed training course, and wear a uniform." "I understand. You won't get special treatment. I don't deserve any." Evelyn stepped forward, pulled open the drawer of her desk, and retrieved a staff application. She slid it across the desk to him, then placed a pen on top. He hesitated. Then he reached out and took it. Their hands did not touch. As he sat to fill it out, Evelyn turned away again. Her face unreadable, but her eyes misted just for a moment. Because even though she didn't say it, even though her forgiveness was not yet offered, something had shifted, not mended, but moved. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived in heels, 3 inches tall, clicking hard against the marble tile of the Minthu Center's front lobby. The sound snapped through the air like distant gunfire echoing off walls painted in calming sage green. Evelyn Snow heard it before she saw her. Clarissa, hair sharp, eyes sharper, dressed in all white as if attempting to stage a resurrection of her own. Her lips were tight, her cheeks flushed with indignation. Behind her trailed the scent of a high-end perfume Evelyn hadn't smelled since the last family Christmas, the one where Clarissa made passive-aggressive jokes about reupholstering Evelyn's dining chairs. This time she wasn't smiling. She blew past the front desk like a woman storming a courtroom, ignoring the receptionist's polite, "Can I help you?" with the flick of a wrist. Nathan, mopping the east hallway, froze when he saw her. The mop clattered to the ground. "Clarissa, don't," he said under his breath. But it was too late. Clarissa flung open the door to Evelyn's office without knocking. Evelyn looked up from her ledger pen, still in hand, posture unmoved. She didn't rise, didn't flinch. "Clarissa," she said simply. "What is this?" Clarissa hissed, gesturing vaguely at the room at the building. "A vanity project? A monument to guilt?" Evelyn closed the ledger. "You're upset." "Upset." Clarissa laughed bitterly. "Upset doesn't cover it, Evelyn. Do you think you can just wipe your hands clean and pretend we don't exist? That this," she waved a manicured finger toward the window, "was never Nathan's birthright." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Birthright," she repeated slowly. Clarissa stepped forward, palms flat on the desk. "You sold land that should have been passed to your son. You built this emotional trap, and now everyone thinks you're some kind of saint. Meanwhile, we're drowning in bills. Do you even care? Evelyn glanced briefly at the security camera embedded in the corner of the ceiling. The red light blinked once. Please lower your voice. There are women here who've been through real trauma. Oh, don't you dare moralize me, Clarissa snapped. You abandoned your family. You left us with nothing. I gave you years, Evelyn said quietly. My house, my health, my silence. And now you're weaponizing it, Clarissa shot back. You think this makes you powerful? You're just an old woman hoarding her story like it's gold. Evelyn said nothing. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a soft cloth, and began wiping her glasses. Clarissa paced the room. We deserve our share, she continued. Nathan was your only child. That property was marital. Half of it should have been his. You know it. Evelyn placed her glasses on the desk and looked up. My husband made sure that land was never part of the estate. It was purchased through a trust. It was mine. It's always been mine. Clarissa leaned in. You're going to give us what's fair. I'm going to ask you to leave, Evelyn said, not unkindly. You can't ignore us forever. I'm not ignoring you. Then fix this. I did, Evelyn said softly, when I stopped letting you decide who I was. For a long moment there was silence. Then Clarissa's expression darkened. This isn't over, she spat. You're not untouchable. No, Evelyn agreed. But I'm no longer within reach. Clarissa slammed the door behind her. The receptionist called security. Nathan stood outside the office, his face pale, jaw tight. He didn't say a word as his wife stormed past him. Clarissa threw him a look laced with betrayal and contempt. You knew, she hissed. You helped her. Nathan didn't deny it. She left. He stayed. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk in the upstairs apartment above the library. The lights below had dimmed. The bell had long since rung its evening song. The women were safe in their rooms, reading or resting or simply breathing. Evelyn opened her laptop, navigated to the center's private cloud system. She downloaded the security footage. Then, without hesitating, she added the audio file recorded from the desk microphone, one she had installed quietly after an earlier incident with an aggressive landlord trying to evict a woman seeking shelter. Clarissa's voice rang out with perfect clarity. You're just an old woman hoarding her story like it's gold. We deserve our share. Fix this. She compiled the clips, added a timestamp, uploaded it to a secure folder. Then she opened a blank document. Titled Defamation Complaint, Civil Grounds. She wrote clearly, methodically. Cited precedent. Attached the video file as supporting evidence. Alleged reputational harm, workplace disturbance, and verbal harassment on a public nonprofit property. She printed 2 copies, one for her records, one for Richard. She added a post-it, prepare for quiet submission. No response unless provoked. The envelope was sealed. The message was not. The next morning she dropped it off at Richard's office. She didn't stay for tea, didn't wait for congratulations. She handed it to his secretary and walked back into the sunlight with her coat zipped and her eyes ahead. The day passed like any other. Books were read. Stories were told. Children laughed. And one woman, old, unbreakable, went about her work with the quiet knowledge that defense doesn't have to shout to be absolute. That protection can be tender and unflinching at once. Clarissa had tried to start a war. Evelyn had simply built a fortress. The break room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paperback pages. The fluorescent light above buzzed in rhythmic pulses, the kind of low mechanical hum that usually faded into the background, except tonight it didn't. Evelyn Snow stood at the far end of the room, a porcelain teacup in one hand and an old envelope in the other. The envelope was yellowed, slightly worn at the corners, the name on the front penned in sharp, deliberate ink, Nathan. She'd thought about this moment for weeks, practiced it in her mind late at night while the library slept, while the women below whispered their dreams into borrowed pillows. She had played it every which way, anger, silence, forgiveness. But when the time came, none of that felt necessary. Tonight was about the truth. Nathan entered the room slowly, unsure of his posture, of what face he should wear. "Hey," he said. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of tea. Then, without ceremony, she placed the envelope on the table between them. He stared at it like it might detonate. "What is it?" he asked, voice low. "From your father," Evelyn said. "He wrote it before he passed. I found it in the box." Nathan didn't move. She looked at him fully now, at the man he had become, the hollowness under his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. the ghost of the boy who used to run barefoot through their backyard with grass-stained knees and boundless questions. She pushed the envelope forward with 2 fingers. "It's time." He sat, slowly, gently, as if the chair might collapse under the weight of what he carried. His hands hovered over the envelope. Then he picked it up, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. He began to read aloud at first, just above a whisper. "Nathan, if you're holding this letter, it means I'm no longer there to say these words aloud. But I need you to hear me anyway, because being a father isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest, especially when it hurts." Nathan stopped. He swallowed. The paper trembled in his grip. "You've always been bright. Stubborn, yes, but brilliant. And I know how hard it is to carry a name, a house, a legacy. But listen to me carefully, none of that means anything if you forget where you came from." His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Evelyn said nothing. She sat across from him, steady, a storm stilled, just long enough to let a man find his footing. "Your mother is the strongest person I've ever known. You won't realize that until the world kicks you in the chest and expects you to keep walking. And when that day comes, and it will come, you'll understand that her quiet wasn't weakness. It was armor." Nathan's eyes filled. The words began to spill. "I've watched her sacrifice herself piece by piece for this family, giving without asking, holding without complaint. And I know you'll forget to thank her. That's part of being a son, but don't let forgetting turn into disrespect." He wiped his face quickly as if ashamed of the tears. "She won't ask you for much. Maybe a call on Sundays. A birthday card she'll pretend not to need. Help with the garden when her knees start to give out. But most of all, she'll want you to see her, not as a burden, not as a fixture, but as a woman who lived, who dreamed, who gave her best years to people who never asked if she was tired." Nathan lowered the letter, choking on breath. Evelyn waited. He picked it back up. "If the day ever comes when she stands before you, not as your mother, but as her own person, I hope you listen. I hope you remember that love isn't ownership, it's gratitude. And if you've failed her, it's never too late to try again." He dropped the letter into his lap, covered his mouth with one hand. His shoulders heaved once, then again. Then the sobs came, not polite tears, not the kind you hide behind closed doors, but the kind that burst from somewhere deep, somewhere locked, shame and guilt and memory colliding all at once. He curled inward, pressing his fist to his chest like something there was breaking. "I didn't know," he whispered. Evelyn said nothing. I thought you were fine. You never asked for anything. You just made it all work. And I let her twist everything." Still Evelyn remained silent. He wiped his face again. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you," he said, voice breaking. "Maybe when Dad died. Maybe before that. But I swear I thought I was doing the right thing. Letting Clarissa manage things. I was weak." Evelyn reached forward, picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the envelope. Then she looked him in the eye. "You weren't weak," she said softly. "You were passive." He flinched. "But I've made peace with that," she continued, "because your father saw you. And now so do I." Nathan's eyes flooded again. "I'm sorry, Mom." She nodded once. "That's not enough," she said, "but it's a start." He looked down at his hands, rough from work, ink-stained from scrubbing the returns desk earlier that morning. He looked like a man who had been dropped from a great height and just learned how to land. "I'll keep showing up," he said quietly. Evelyn stood. She walked around the table, and for the first time in what felt like decades, she placed her hand on his shoulder. He looked up. There was no forgiveness in her touch, only recognition. The kind that says, "I remember you, the real you, and maybe, just maybe, he's still in there." Neither of them said a word for a long time. The buzz of the fluorescent light faded. The world held its breath. And in that small break room tucked inside a library built from ashes, a mother and son sat on opposite sides of a scar and finally began to sew. Forgiveness didn't come like a warm blanket or a sweeping gesture. It came in shifts, in silence, in the way Evelyn Snow left the break room door ajar the next morning, in the way she handed Nathan a clipboard and a small ring of keys with no ceremony, no explanation, just the faintest nod that said, "You're still here, so start from here." His new duties were humble: collecting trash from reading rooms, refilling hand soap, restocking tea bags in the kitchen, washing the lobby windows until the morning sun made them glow like stained glass. The uniform had no name tag, just the emblem of the Minthu Center stitched in silver thread, a rising book with roots for pages. Nathan wore it like penance, and Evelyn let him. She didn't watch him work, didn't hover, but she noticed things. How he wiped down the children's tables twice a day even when they weren't sticky. How he picked up books left behind and slid handwritten bookmarks into the spines with the care of someone who finally understood that words mattered. How he stopped asking for more and started simply doing more. There were no apologies between shifts, no tearful mother-son lunches, just labor, humble, honest labor. And Evelyn, she accepted that. Because trust wasn't something you gave, it was something rebuilt, one mop stroke at a time. One unopened envelope at a time. The story might have stayed within those quiet library walls, if not for a local journalist named Jada Lane, a sharp-eyed 29-year-old columnist who had visited the center while covering a story on women's shelters and ended up staying 3 extra hours just to listen. She had seen Nathan through the glass on his knees scraping gum from beneath a reading bench. She had asked Evelyn off the record, "Is that your son?" And Evelyn, without turning from the shelf she was stalking, had replied, "That's the boy who once made me a Mother's Day card out of cereal boxes and said he'd never love anyone more than me." Jada wrote the piece in less than a day. It ran under the title "The Quiet Justice of Evelyn Snow." It spread like spilled ink. The article described Evelyn's rise from betrayal to resilience, how she turned her pain into shelter, how she hired the very son who had cast her out, not out of weakness, but conviction. It quoted the letter from Arthur, though not in full, just enough to make readers pause and see their own families between the lines. But it was Jada's final paragraph that made the piece viral. In a world eager to punish, Evelyn chose boundaries over vengeance. She gave her son not her fortune but a broom, and in doing so gave him back his humanity. This isn't the story of a woman scorned. It's the story of a woman who knew her worth and made the world remember it. By the end of the week, Aunt Evelyn Snow was trending on social media. Thousands of women reposted the story with captions like, "She's who I want to be when I grow up," and "She didn't just survive, she created." Donations poured into the Center Books Bedding Meals gift cards. Former students of Evelyn's from her early teaching years emailed her thanking her for showing them what dignity looked like. Television crews called. Podcast hosts begged for interviews. She declined them all. "My story's already written," she said. "It's on the walls. Let them come see it for themselves." But not everyone admired from a distance. Clarissa's name once plastered across Havenbrook's socialite circuit as a wellness entrepreneur began showing up in new headlines. Not for charity galas, but for screenshots. Clips from the center's security footage, subtly leaked by a volunteer with access, made their way to the internet. Her voice, sharp and titled, rang through millions of ears. "You're just an old woman hoarding her story like it's gold." The backlash was immediate. Clarissa's few remaining investors pulled out. Her skincare brand's website was flooded with refund demands. Influencers who once promoted her serums quietly deleted their posts. Customers left 1-star reviews not for the product, but for her. The local newspaper ran a follow-up piece, "The Cost of Entitlement, When Image Collides with Legacy." At the next city council event, she arrived uninvited and was asked politely, firmly to leave. No one stood to defend her. Even her own parents, facing bankruptcy from past due loans, stepped back from the spotlight, too tired to carry her shame. She tried to contact Nathan. He didn't respond. She tried to corner Evelyn again, this time outside the center gates. Evelyn stood still, unmoved. "There's nothing here for you," she said. Clarissa didn't argue. She just stared, confused, hollow, as if she'd forgotten who she was without control. That was the last anyone saw of her in Havenbrook. Within days, her social media accounts vanished. Her boutique shuttered, and rumor had it she left the city entirely, disappearing into some small town out west to live under a different name. Evelyn never mentioned her again. But one night, as she and Nathan locked up the library, she said quietly, "Sometimes absence is the clearest answer we get." He nodded, and they walked on. No words, just the click of keys, the sigh of the bell tower above them, and the soft rustle of pages still turning somewhere in the dark. The transformation didn't come all at once. It came quietly, like the way morning light seeps in through heavy curtains, gentle, steady, impossible to ignore once it arrives. Nathan Snow worked 6 days a week at the Minthu Center. He no longer checked the clock, no longer wore headphones to tune out the world. His uniform shirt, once stiff with newness, now softened with wear. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and paperback glue. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, it was in tones stripped of ego. He fixed broken hinges before anyone asked. He brewed extra pots of tea when the weather turned. He waited until the last woman left the common room at night before dimming the lights. He listened more than he ever had in his life. He listened to a mother of 3 recount how she escaped her abuser with nothing but a diaper bag and a library card. He listened to a retired nurse speak about how her children stopped calling after she moved into assisted living. He listened to laughter, to silence, to unspoken things that floated between broken women trying to stitch their stories back together. And in those quiet hours, he changed, not loudly, not visibly, but cell by cell. He started leaving anonymous bookmarks inside returned novels, handwritten notes like, "You are not your past," or "You're allowed to begin again." He didn't sign them. He didn't want credit. That's how Evelyn knew he was healing. She watched from a distance, not as a mother, but as a woman who had finally learned to love without expectation. At night, after the library had closed and the floors had been swept, Evelyn returned to her upstairs apartment with a cup of tea and a ritual. She would open her wooden box, the one Arthur had left her, and remove a letter. Just one. She'd read it slowly, silently, then place it on the desk, turn on her ancient laptop, and begin to type. The first time she posted one of his letters on the Minthu Center's website, she didn't think much would come of it. It was the one labeled "To Evelyn, when you can't sleep." She titled the post, "A Letter from Arthur, for the Women Who Lie Awake at Night." By morning, the post had over 8,000 views. Hundreds of comments poured in, many from older women, some from men, a few from teenagers, who said it reminded them of their grandmother's voice. One read, "I haven't cried in 5 years. This letter made me sob. Thank you for reminding me that my story isn't over." Another, "I'm 67. My husband passed 2 years ago. This is the first time I've felt held." Evelyn read every single one. She didn't reply. She just posted another letter the next week, and then another. The letters were never edited. She left Arthur's awkward phrasing and old-fashioned punctuation intact. It was part of the charm, part of the truth. One was titled, "To My Wife on the Day You Forgot Yourself." Another, "What I Should Have Said When You Gave Up the Cruise." There were 23 in total. By the time she published the 12th, the Minthu site had been bookmarked in thousands of browsers. The press called again. Evelyn declined again. "I'm not the story she told them," the words are. She began collecting anonymous responses from readers. Women from small towns in Ohio, farmhouses in Iowa, trailer parks in Nevada, apartments in Queens. They wrote things like, "This letter felt like a map. He said what I always wished my husband would. Now I write letters to myself." Soon the Minthu Center had an entire section of its website titled "The Letters Archive." Women sent in their own letters, some written to themselves, some to daughters they hadn't spoken to in years, some to mothers who never said sorry, others to husbands both alive and long buried. The project took on a life of its own. A local nonprofit offered to publish the letters in a printed volume called "Words We Never Heard, a Collection from the Quieted." Evelyn agreed on one condition: no profits to her name, all proceeds to fund shelter expansion and mental health care. The first print run sold out in 2 days, but none of that. The media requests the fundraising milestones, the quiet fame mattered to her as much as what she saw happening inside the building she'd built with memory and fire. Women sat longer in the reading room. They stayed up later, trading stories in hushed tones with new friends who felt more like sisters. And Nathan, he read every new letter she posted. Evelyn knew because he would pause at the staff computer in the hallway, eyes scanning the screen long after his shift had ended. One evening after closing, he found her upstairs sitting at the window. He knocked once, entered quietly. "I read the one from Tuesday," he said. "The one about the piano lessons." She nodded. He sat beside her, his shoulders still, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I didn't know Dad watched that closely," he said. Evelyn looked at him not as the boy who disappointed her, but the man who was trying. He watched everything she said. He just didn't say much. Nathan chuckled, wiping at his eye. Guess I inherited that. No, she said. You inherited his hands, his heart, the silence. That was your own choosing. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. I've been writing, he said. Letters. She took it from him, unfolded it. It wasn't long, just 3 sentences, but they made her throat catch. Mom, I used to think you'd always be there because you were always quiet. I understand now that quiet wasn't weakness. It was your way of holding the whole damn house up while the rest of us looked away. I see you now. Love, Nathan. Evelyn didn't cry. She placed the letter inside the wooden box with Arthur's. Then for the first time in a long time, she reached out and pulled her son into a hug. Not stiff, not obligated, but whole. And in the silence of that moment, surrounded by echoes of grief and redemption, Evelyn Snow smiled. Not because she'd won, but because she had finally fully been seen. The sky over Havenbrook turned the color of memory pale gold, threaded with soft dusk blue, as guests began to arrive at the Minthu Center for the exhibition. Outside the gates, lanterns swayed gently in the evening wind, their light flickering like heartbeats. A long cloth banner arched over the entrance, elegant and simple, bearing 6 words in bold, handwritten lettering. Legacy of Love. The letters of Arthur Snow. Inside the library glowed. String lights ran along the beams. Soft classical music hummed from vintage speakers. Women in dresses and coats and scarves and slacks wandered through rows of framed letters mounted beneath warm light. Each letter bore Arthur's handwriting. His quiet ink strokes turned public immortal. Each display included a printed transcription and a small plaque with a quote submitted by a woman who had read it online. A young woman stood before one letter. To Evelyn, on the day you forgot yourself, and pressed her fingers to her lips. An older man holding a cane leaned close to the weight of what you carried and nodded as if recognizing his own silence on the page. Volunteers moved through the crowd offering tea, gently pointing guests toward the reading circle in the back room where stories would be shared at dusk. Near the front of the library, a makeshift stage had been set, a few risers, borrowed from the community center, backed by a banner of wildflowers. Rows of chairs filled quickly. Evelyn Snow sat in the first row. She wore navy again. A small silver locket hung at her throat. Her hands were folded calmly in her lap, her spine straight, her expression unreadable except for one detail, her eyes. They shimmered with something fierce and quiet. Pride, yes, but something deeper, a recognition. She had lived to see her life translated, to see pain alchemized into paper and shared breath, to see her husband's words echo through the hearts of strangers. And then came Nathan. He stepped onto the stage in a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled at the wrists, eyes brimming even before he spoke. The crowd hushed. He stood behind the wooden podium, placed one hand flat on its surface like it grounded him, and for a moment he couldn't speak. His lips parted, his jaw worked, but nothing came. He looked at his mother. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just looked back. Steady. It was enough. Nathan cleared his throat and began. My name is Nathan Snow, he said. I am the son of Arthur and Evelyn Snow. I used to think that meant something. Solid. Unshakable. That legacy was just something you inherited, like a piece of furniture or an old watch. He paused. But legacy is something you build, not something you're owed. And tonight, I'd like to tell you about the man who built mine without ever saying a word about it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. I found this in a drawer last month, he said, unfolding the page. It was never labeled, never sealed. I think maybe he meant to read it aloud. But in the end, he wrote it down instead. He looked down at the page and began. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in your will. It's what people feel when they say your name. It's the warmth that rises when a child remembers how you made them laugh. It's the forgiveness you never asked for but earned. My wife carried our family when I could not. She softened the blows the world gave me, and if I am remembered at all, I want it to be as her witness. To love her was my greatest fortune. To fail her was my deepest regret. But she kept the lights on. She kept the story going. Nathan folded the letter slowly. The room was silent. Some wept openly. Others held their breath. He looked back up. And now, he said, voice breaking, I work in the very place she built from those ashes. I sweep the floors of her resilience. I polish the glass on her memory. I am not her heir. I am her student. A long breath. I was blind for a long time. I was small, but she forgave me not with words, but with opportunity. She gave me a job not to shame me, but to show me what rebuilding looks like. He turned, gesturing gently toward Evelyn. She is not a victim. She is not even a hero. She is a woman who remembered herself, and in doing so reminded the rest of us who we could be. Applause rose like thunder after a long silence, but Evelyn didn't move. She didn't clap. She just closed her eyes and let the sound pass through her like light through stained glass. As the guests rose to view the final display, Letter 23, What I Never Said Out Loud, the camera began to pull back. It glided past the shelves lined with books donated in her name, past the wall of reader-submitted letters written in dozens of languages, past the community board covered in thank-you notes, sketches, prayers, and pressed flowers, out through the windows, glowing against the night like lanterns of old. And as the camera moved farther, the image of the Minthu Center sharpened, solid, warm, alive with purpose. Dozens of women stood outside, arms linked. Children laughed in the side garden. Volunteers served soup in the shelter wing. Nathan stood at the door, shaking hands, humbled. And Evelyn sat alone for a moment longer before rising. The camera lifted, higher, waiter, until the whole street glowed with quiet revolution, until the library itself stood like a monument not to revenge, not to bitterness, but to the act of reclaiming, to the courage of staying, to the grace of letting go. And across the screen in bold white letters the final words appeared. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is the strongest way to close the circle of betrayal.